World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history, a global war that reshaped nations, borders, and the balance of power forever. It began in 1939 when Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland, triggering a chain reaction of alliances that pulled Europe and eventually the world into war. At its core, the conflict was driven by unresolved tensions from World War I, economic collapse during the Great Depression, and the rise of aggressive totalitarian regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan. As Germany swept across Europe using rapid blitzkrieg tactics, countries like France fell in weeks, while Britain stood alone under relentless air bombardment during the Battle of Britain, refusing to surrender. In 1941, the war expanded dramatically when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa, opening the largest and bloodiest front of the war, and when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, drawing the United States into the conflict and transforming it into a truly global war. Across Europe, the war became one of total destruction. Cities were bombed, civilians were targeted, and entire populations were mobilized for survival. The Holocaust unfolded in the shadows of the conflict as Nazi Germany systematically murdered 6 million Jews, along with millions of others in concentration and extermination camps, marking one of the darkest chapters in human history. On the Eastern Front, battles like Stalingrad turned the tide against Germany, costing millions of lives and breaking the myth of Nazi invincibility. In North Africa and the Atlantic, control of supply routes determined survival, while in the Pacific, brutal island-hopping campaigns brought American and Allied forces closer to Japan, fighting through harsh terrain and fierce resistance. By 1944, the balance of power had shifted. Allied forces launched the D-Day invasion in Normandy, opening a Western front that pushed Germany back toward its borders. As Soviet troops advanced from the east, the Third Reich collapsed, and in May 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in the Pacific ended months later after the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, forcing Japan's surrender and introducing nuclear weapons to the world for the first time. World War II officially ended in September 1945, but its consequences were just beginning. Europe lay in ruins, millions were displaced, and new global powers emerged. From the ashes of the war came a transformed world. The United States and the Soviet Union rose as superpowers, setting the stage for the Cold War. The United Nations was created to prevent future global conflicts, while decolonization movements gained momentum across Asia and Africa. Advances in technology, medicine, and industry accelerated, but at a terrible human cost, with over 60 million people dead. World War II did not simply change borders or governments. It changed how humanity understood war, power, and responsibility. Its lessons continue to shape the modern world, reminding us that the choices of nations can alter the course of history forever. Even decades later, the legacy of World War II remains deeply woven into everyday life. International laws on human rights and war crimes were strengthened in response to the atrocities uncovered, leading to trials that established the principle that individuals, not just nations, could be held accountable for crimes against humanity. Borders drawn in the aftermath of the war continue to influence modern conflicts, while alliances formed during the fighting evolved into long-term military and political blocs. Economically, the reconstruction of Europe through programs like the Marshall Plan reshaped global trade and solidified the United States' influence worldwide. At the same time, the memory of total war left societies determined to avoid another catastrophe on the same scale. World War II also reshaped culture and identity. Stories of resistance, sacrifice, and survival became part of national memories, passed down through generations. Veterans returned to rebuild their lives, while survivors carried lasting physical and emotional scars. The war proved that modern conflict could reach every home, every city, and every continent, blurring the line between battlefield and civilian life. More than a historical event, World War II stands as a warning and a lesson, showing how quickly ambition, fear, and ideology can lead the world to destruction, and how cooperation and remembrance remain essential to preserving peace in the future. World War II reshaped the modern world not only through its battles and political outcomes, but through the profound transformation of societies economies, and human thought. As the fighting spread across continents, governments reorganized entire nations around the demands of war. Factories were converted to produce weapons, vehicles, and supplies at unprecedented speed, while scientific research accelerated under military pressure. Radar, jet engines, rockets, antibiotics like penicillin, and advances in mass production all emerged or rapidly improved during the conflict. These innovations would later spill into civilian life, shaping transportation, medicine, and technology for decades. The war demonstrated the full power of industrialized nations, showing that modern warfare depended as much on factories, logistics, and scientific knowledge as on soldiers at the front. For civilians, the war meant constant uncertainty and sacrifice. In occupied territories, daily life was defined by shortages, forced labor, and fear. Resistance movements formed across Europe and Asia, carried out by ordinary men and women who sabotaged supply lines, gathered intelligence, and protected the persecuted at great personal risk. In cities like London, Berlin, Tokyo, and Leningrad, aerial bombardment turned urban centers into targets, killing hundreds of thousands and destroying homes, schools, and hospitals. The siege of Leningrad alone lasted nearly 900 days, causing mass starvation and suffering while the city refused to surrender. These experiences permanently altered how societies viewed the relationship between civilians and war, reinforcing the idea that modern conflicts spared no one. The ideological struggle at the heart of World War II also reshaped political thought. Fascism, which had promised strength and unity, was exposed through its brutality, expansionism, and crimes against humanity. Its defeat discredited the ideology on a global scale. At the same time, the war strengthened belief in self-determination and democratic governance, even as it also expanded the influence of communism in Eastern Europe and parts of Asia. The Soviet Union's immense sacrifices and military victories gave it both prestige and control over vast territories, leading to the division of Europe into competing ideological spheres. This division would harden into the Cold War, a long period of tension defined by nuclear standoffs, proxy wars, and global rivalry that shaped international relations for nearly half a century. The human cost of World War II remains almost impossible to fully comprehend. Entire communities were erased, families separated, and cultures disrupted. Beyond the Holocaust, millions of civilians died from famine, forced displacement, and disease caused by the collapse of normal life. Prisoners of war endured brutal conditions, and many never returned home. The psychological impact of the war lingered long after the fighting stopped, as survivors struggled with trauma, grief, and loss. These experiences pushed societies to reconsider how war should be remembered and taught, leading to memorials, remembrance days, and a growing effort to preserve historical truth through education and documentation. In Asia, the consequences of the war were equally transformative. Japan's defeat ended its imperial ambitions and led to a period of occupation and reform that reshaped the country's political system, economy, and role in the world. China emerged from the war deeply weakened, setting the stage for civil war in the eventual establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949. Across Southeast Asia, European colonial powers returned after the war to find their authority challenged by independence movements inspired by wartime promises and sacrifices. Nations such as India, Indonesia, and Vietnam moved toward independence, accelerating the global decline of colonial empires. World War II thus acted as a catalyst for decolonization, changing the political map of the world. Economically, the war marked a turning point in global power. While much of Europe and Asia lay in ruins, the United States emerged with its industrial base intact and vastly expanded. This imbalance allowed the U.S. to play a central role in rebuilding war-torn regions and shaping the post-war economic order. International institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were established to stabilize currencies and promote reconstruction and development. These structures laid the foundation for modern globalization, linking economies more closely than ever before. At the same time, the war highlighted the dangers of economic instability, reinforcing the belief that cooperation and shared prosperity were essential to lasting peace. The creation of the United Nations represented one of the most direct attempts to learn from the failures of the past. Unlike the League of Nations, which had been weakened by limited participation and authority, The United Nations was designed to include the world's major powers and provide mechanisms for diplomacy, peacekeeping, and international law. While it could not eliminate conflict, it became a central forum for dialogue and cooperation, reflecting the hope that global problems require global solutions. Human rights, once considered largely internal matters, became an international concern, leading to declarations and conventions aimed at protecting individuals from state-sponsored abuse. World War II also changed how history itself was recorded and understood. The scale of the conflict generated vast archives of documents, photographs, film, and personal testimonies. War correspondents brought images of destruction and heroism directly to the public, shaping public opinion in real time. After the war, historians, journalists, and survivors worked to document events in detail, recognizing that memory was a defense against denial and distortion. This commitment to historical accuracy became especially important in confronting the Holocaust and other atrocities, ensuring that evidence could withstand attempts to minimize or erase the truth. Culturally, the war influenced literature, film, and art across generations. Stories of courage, resistance, and moral choice explored the complexity of human behavior under extreme pressure. At the same time, the war challenged simplistic narratives of good and evil by revealing the capacity for cruelty and compassion within ordinary people. These cultural responses helped societies process the trauma of the conflict and question the assumptions that had led to it. World War II thus became not just a historical subject, but a moral reference point, shaping debates about intervention, responsibility, and the limits of power. Perhaps the most lasting and unsettling legacy of World War II was the introduction of nuclear weapons. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki demonstrated that humanity now possessed the means to destroy entire cities in moments. This reality transformed global politics, introducing the concept of deterrence and the constant fear of nuclear war. While these weapons were used only once in combat, their existence influenced every major international crisis that followed. The shadow of nuclear destruction forced nations to reconsider the cost of conflict and the necessity of diplomacy, even as it created new dangers and ethical dilemmas that remain unresolved. As time passes, World War II moves further from living memory, but its influence remains visible in borders, alliances, institutions, and shared values. The war stands as a turning point where the world confronted the consequences of unchecked aggression, racism, and authoritarianism on a global scale. It showed both the depths of human cruelty and the capacity for cooperation and resilience. In understanding World War II, we do more than study the past. We confront questions about power, responsibility, and the choices that shape history. The world we live in today was forged in the fires of that conflict, and its lessons remain essential for navigating the challenges of the present and future.